Good day, good evening. Welcome everybody to our webinar today on the first day of New York Climate Week. We're really pleased to be talking to you today with a great range of presenters and panelists to talk about how forest restoration can deliver a true, green and just recovery, focusing on key principles and best practices with experiences from the ground. My name is Noelle Kumpel. I'm Head of Policy at BirdLife International, and this webinar today is hosted by BirdLife and Trillion Trees, which is a partnership of BirdLife, the Wildlife Conservation Society and WWF. We're going to be talking today about the importance of forest restoration for climate and the need to embed ambitious restoration pledges in nationally determined contributions and policies. We're going to be looking at the need to recognise how to do restoration properly in order to deliver these long-term sustainable outcomes. And we're going to be looking at a combination of the technical aspects, the processes and outcomes that we want to see, policy, incentives and safeguards, and finance in terms of green recovery and climate finance. And looking ahead to the upcoming events focused on climate and finance, particularly COP26, but looking towards how forest restoration contributes to an equitable, carbon neutral, nature positive future and the efforts we need to put in over the next decade. So we're gonna, if we move to the next slide, just to meet our speakers, we have 6 fantastic panelists with us today who are each going to give us a very short 5-minute presentation, and then we'll move to a question and answer session for the rest of the session, and the whole session will take an hour. The speakers, firstly, we'll have Dr. Pushendra Satyal, who's the Global Forest Policy Coordinator here with us at BirdLife International. Then we'll have Jose Luis Cartes, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Gaida Paraguay, our BirdLife partner in Paraguay. He'll be doing a joint presentation with Andres Bosso, the NEA Program Coordinator at Aves Argentina, our Argentinian partner. And then we'll hear from Mr. Solomon Adefolu, who's the lead for climate change at the Nigerian Conservation Foundation, a BirdLife partner in Nigeria. Then we'll be hearing from John Lotspeech, the Executive Director of Trillion Trees. And then finally from Ava Mayhoffer, the Principal Advisor and Lead Environment and Biodiversity Specialist at the European Investment Bank. So just as a few housekeeping elements here, we're recording this session, so just to let you know, and hopefully that is okay. If it's not, you're free to leave. The recording will then be uploaded to the BirdLife website and our YouTube channel, so you can watch it later, and we'll be sending the recording through by email to everyone who's registered. Every speaker will be speaking just for 5 minutes, running us through a couple of slides to make some key points, and then we'll be moving on to a question and answer. So please do put your questions into the Q&A chat box on the Zoom link here. And if you have any technical, any queries, technical issues with the audio and things like that, please put that into the Zoom chat box. But for specific questions to the speakers, if you put that into the Q&A chat box. We will try to bring as many of those into the discussion, and otherwise the speakers may be able to respond through the chat box itself. We won't be able to take oral questions, but so please type them in and get in touch with any other issues that way. And we'll have the Q&A session once all the presentations have been given. So now to move through to our first speaker, as I mentioned, that's Dr. Pushendra Satyal, Global Forest Policy Officer, Policy Coordinator here at BirdLife, and he's going to be kicking us off with a few with a short perspective on forest restoration for a green and just recovery, key principles and best practices. Over to you, Pushendra.
Thank you, Noel. So in this presentation, I'll briefly discuss about some of the key principles and best practices on forest restoration based on BirdLife and our partners' experience in the field. So forest restoration, when implemented effectively and sustainably, also contribute to a number of benefits in terms of protection of biodiversity, improving human health and well-being, and increasing food and water security, as well as supporting climate change mitigation, resilience, and adaptation. So in that sense, forest restoration can play a central role in terms of green and just global recovery. So let's go into the principles. So we have picked up 8 key principles. So the first principle is about focusing on quality as well as the quantity to achieve multiple benefits. Because it is not simply enough to track restoration in terms of the quantity, such as the size of the restored forested landscape or the number of trees planted, but we also focus on quality, that is to achieve highest level of recovery possible by focusing on ecological integrity as well as connectivity across forested landscapes. So the second principle then is about doing restoration in the right way in order to achieve quality outcomes for nature, climate, and people. And similarly, the third principle is about the importance of putting people at the center of restoration planning, implementation, and monitoring, and the importance of having multi-stakeholder engagement, because restoration needs to be done with and for local people in order to make it both equitable and effective. Then the fourth principle is about being able to track the progress of restoration and having a robust monitoring framework. We need to plan and undertake monitoring and evaluation and incorporate adaptive management and learning throughout the restoration process using clear goals and objectives as well as smart indicators. So the fifth principle relates to the importance of thinking global and acting local. That is the importance of scaling up and down. That means restoration needs to be undertaken at every scale and ecosystem worldwide. Because in order to have a transformational change that is needed, we need to consider larger landscape and socio-ecological and cultural settings. Then sixth, there is also the need to mainstream policies and governance so that restoration is carried out across society and different sectors. Most importantly, we need to scale up funding and finance from both the public and private sector. Restoration and green recovery on a global scale requires sustained investment, but in the long run, it can pay for itself. Then the seventh principle is about getting our priority order right, because we need to first focus on conserving existing carbon and biodiversity-rich ecosystems, and then restore the fragmented and degraded landscapes, then doing massive plantation. We also need to address degradation drivers. Then finally, the eighth principle is about sustaining these efforts beyond the 2030 timeline of UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. So in the next slide, please move to the next slide. So in the next slide, I would like to highlight some of the issues, some of the things to remember while operationalizing these key principles and best practices. These relate to both the outcomes and processes of forest restoration, and also explain what to do, why to do, and how to do in restoration, summarized in terms of what we call the principles of 4R, 4 Cs, and 3 Es. So in terms of the principle of 4Rs, in terms of what to do, we need to focus on restoring the right trees, that is replanting or allowing natural regeneration of native trees, including the rare and endangered species, and then in the right place, that is giving priority to connecting and expanding existing natural forests rather than doing massive plantation, and involving right stakeholders, that is working with and for indigenous people and local communities, and through right means, that is also considering capacity, funding, and long-term sustainability. And in terms of the why to do, we need to focus on enhancing not only the forest cover, but also forest condition. This includes ecosystem integrity and biodiversity as a component of this, and also enhancing forest carbon and supporting the different types of the communities that depend on or benefit from that forest ecosystem. So that's the principle of 4 Cs. And in terms of how to do this, this can be done through applying 3 Es principles, that is engaging, enabling, and empowering a variety of stakeholders at multiple skills, and fully incorporating both the scientific knowledge and indigenous knowledge of different types in restoration. So next slide, please. So in terms of these principles, in terms of the details, you can look into our website where we have published a web story and 2-page briefing on the topic. So I leave it there. Thank you very much. Over to you, Manuel.
Oops, struggling with the mute there. Thank you so much, Pishenda. That's excellent. And we will pop into the chat the link to the web story and those principles so that you can that people can look at those later. So now on to the next speaker. That's a combination, I should say, of two people, Jose Luis Cartes from Gira, Paraguay, and Angeles Bosso from Aves, Argentina. So try to keep to the limit, very limited time for the pair of you, but take it away, both of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Noel, and it's a pleasure to be here. So I want to talk about some experience of restoration that we have in the Atlantic forest in Paraguay. Next, please. Can we move? Okay. So in the eastern region of Paraguay, as can you see below, we have some reserves area that is called Guirareta, the land of birds. And as you know, Atlantic forest is very under very situations of pressure, mainly illegal crops, logging, etc. So we have some experience of restoration in some patches inside our reserve in that area. In the right map, you can see some of the plots on the red lines, not the circle, no, it's the other one, that we have a very nice experience. And we facilitate the restoration like promoting the natural succession of the forest. So it was a very nice experience, but the socioeconomic situation of the region is very adverse to this kind of work, because all this, the economics of the area is raised in illegal issues, as the marijuana plantation, need to clean some forest area because they plant marijuana inside the forest. And then we are moving the restoration program as an agroforestry program with yerba mate, the shade growth and organic yerba mate, trying to develop natural corridors to Argentina. Next, please. So the main conclusion are that the forest, we need to cope with several pressures. And the socioeconomic is very important, because the fire actually is used to clean the forest. And the next step is to upgrade, to scale the experience. And right now we are trying to develop models for campesinos to cope illegal issues. So we are very confident that we are in the right way, mixing agroforestry and restoration with yerba mate, that is an infusion native from the Atlantic forest. Next, please. So that is all for me. I give the floor to Andres.
Thank you very much, Pepe, and thank you to the invitation, and hello to everybody. Well, as Pepe said, and to reinforce his words, the Atlantic forest is one of the more fruitful forests in the world, and we have 8% left of this ecoregion, of this biome. So the restoration is urgent and should be smart, and not with protected areas is not enough to solve the situation of this biome. As you can see on the left, there is a map produced by the government that I think is the smart part that I said before, to set up priorities. So luckily, Misiones province, through the provincial and the national government, set up the priorities of the areas of the sites that should be restored immediately. Aves Argentinas is working in 2 of them, in the north part of the province, in a place called the Green Bridge in the peninsula of Andresito, and there is another place that is called Curindi, a private reserve. The next one. Thank you. In the left, you can see one of the plots that we are working in the Curindi Reserve. That it's part of a property of 600 hectares, and 300 of them are strict protected. You can see the engineers working planting trees as a part of our active restoration system. And this initiative inspired us in 2 ways. First, we, as in the right is shown, we launched this booklet that it's a guide for restore at a small scale in the Atlantic forest. And there are a lot of key stakeholders that are using the material right now. And in the low photograph, you can see a yerba mate crop there. Exactly. And as Pepe said, is part inseparable, the agroforestry and the restoration. We are launching our own seal that is called a CA, that is a Guarani name that means herbs and forest, but in Spanish means cultivo amigo de las aves, bird-friendly crop. And we are proposing that with organic yerba mate plantations, the owners has to protect the same property, the same surface that are in the crops. So this is the model that we are promoting, and in this week we have a first meeting with the organic farmers in Misiones province to present this model and set up the mechanisms on the ground. So we are trying to follow the principles that Poshendra showed in the first slides. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. That was really great and whistle-stop tour of some of the issues and the work you're doing on the ground in those 2 countries. Thank you very much. If we follow through to the next slide. And next up, we have Solomon Adefolu, who's the lead for climate change at the Nigerian Conservation Foundation, who is going to tell us a little bit more about how we're embedding some of these principles into national level strategies for green recovery.
Thank you, Neil, for having me. Yes, so I'm going to be sharing about nature restoration action, how it delivers global goals and green recovery in Africa, just to spotlight on the Green Recovery Nigeria project that NCF is implementing in Nigeria. Next slide. So just to share about the model and the progress. The Green Recovery Nigeria, it's at a big goal of restoring forest cover by 25% by 2047. And in achieving this big goal, we had some baseline studies of what really is causing the loss of forest cover in Nigeria. And the main cause of forest loss in Nigeria is deforestation and also logging. And the first thing we did in Nigeria is to actually look at the Nigeria's restoration blueprint, which has the 5 R's: the right place to plant, the right species, the right people that is going to be planting with you, and the right timing that you are going to be planting this, and in right quantity. So those are very key principles that are very useful, that has taken us through this journey of restoration in Nigeria. And when we discovered this baseline, we found out that in 2016, forest cover in Nigeria was between 5 to 7%, which was not up to the 25% recommended by the FAO. And when we've done all of these studies, we engaged communities as well as youth organizations and community-based organizations to be able to achieve this restoration project, because it is a big one. Imagine planting, restoring forest across the entire Nigeria's landscape. And in 2018 that we started this project, we've been able to cover 17 states in Nigeria, planting over 2.5 million trees. And we've also been able to achieve develop a one restoration plan, which is a subnational restoration plan, which I'm going to be talking about later on. And we think that by 2047, we'll have been able to achieve the 25% forest cover that we want to do. And in doing all of this has helped to create green jobs for teeming youth in terms of tourism and all of that. And one of the greatest approach that has also helped us is how we have utilized afforestation, combined afforestation and natural regeneration into what we are doing in terms of meeting up with the restoration target. And over the years, we've been able to reforest about close to about 3,000 hectares of land, and also try to regenerate and support the existing natural land, which is about 151,000 hectares. These are KBAs, these are protected areas managed by government, private organizations, and also subnationals. This we think that will help us to be able to deliver on these ambitious targets. And our youth have been recognized. The 4 of our youths working on restoration were recognized globally in the AFW Africa Forest Restoration Initiative sometimes last year. Next slide. Yes, so all of this work on the ground, we are also backing it up with a strong advocacy action. And one of the advocacy action is the subnational restoration plan, which I mentioned that was developed for the Anambra State government. And this has been integrated into the appropriation bill. Anambra now has about a 5-year plan to restore the forest in Anambra State, using those methodologies of afforestation and natural regeneration and combining it with the element of multi-stakeholder engagement. And also using the knowledge that we have been able to gather and provide through our restoration blueprint, which is backed by science and policy action. And one of the advocacy that we have also done is to be able to mainstream these plans, this green recovery project into national plans like the NDC that has just been revised, and some forest policy that was also revised last year. This has helped governments to own this project and also be able to provide finance and support and political will to be able to deliver on this. In terms of providing education for and engaging youth to be able to deliver on all of these, we develop some youth action manual on climate change for target groups between 5 to 29 years to be able to understand their role in delivering the NDC and also integrating the restoration goal or the national restoration goal in this manual. Engaging private sector is also a very big deal. We've worked to green the Nigerian business through an initiative we call Nature Means Business Coalition. This is a consortium, a coalition consisting of organizations, private sector organizations that are supporting and providing the enabling environment for restoration work in Nigeria. And these are some of the big polluters that are also offsetting, using it as offsetting their emission, and trusting on what the project looks like for us and being able to deliver on this was a big win for us in getting them to buy into the Nature Means Business Coalition. And this helps us also to sustain this and finance this. And some of the two key financing instruments that has also helped to achieve this is the green bond, the sovereign green bond that Nigeria has floated, the first and the second round, which was oversubscribed. And the last green bond, which had nearly about 40% of the total investment going into restoration work in Nigeria, while the 60% goes into renewable energy, as well as other climate-related projects. And the big funding also came from the National Forestry Trust Funds, which was we were able to use in terms of actualizing this. And that has been how we have been able to integrate these into the national plan and also help to create jobs and also to deliver the global goals. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Solomon. That was a lot to cover and really, really helpful perspective there at the national level and on the different policy and finance options available. Now, if we move on to John. So our next speaker is John Lott-Speech, who's the Executive Director of Trillion Trees, and is going to give us a perspective on partnerships and what the initiative that Trillion Trees can bring.
Thank you, Noelle, and thank you to the previous panelists. It's always humbling and inspiring to hear what's happening at the national level when you work at a partnership level. But maybe just a couple of things about why we came together as a partnership at Trillion Trees, which Noelle has already pointed out is BirdLife, Wildlife Conservation Society, and WWF. And it came from the insight, particularly around restoration, is that often, as we've just heard from the panelists, there is this great restoration work going on, and then we often find ourselves hoping that we'll be able to find the resources or the investment to take that to scale or to accelerate our impact. So Trillion Trees in particular exist to try and speed up the rate at which we're able to do this work, because the crisis is so acute at the moment. So if you think of Trillion Trees as an impact accelerator, we've tried to take that model of restoration and almost reverse it. So by identifying, as this map shows, sort of the places where we believe that we are ready to go for restoration, where our partners, whether it's BirdLife, WCS, or WWF, can begin either natural restoration or planting trees, whatever it happens to be. And this slide, I think, has three key things for us to take away. That first is the pre-identification. I hope everyone can hear me okay. I see that, but I'm going to just continue on.
No, we can hear you very well. Thank you.
Okay, fine.
Perfect.
So this pre-identification is to try and make sure that when investment and resources come, that we can start work immediately on restoration. The second is to be smart about the way our partnership works. So instead of this being three different conservation projects run by each of the three partners, but to be smart about what we call the layers of expertise. So BirdLife, for example, being made up of national partners, is very connected to the communities in which they work. So it might be that in any given country on this map that perhaps maybe WWF has higher national political collections, and maybe WCS can work at some of the really remote parts of the country. And so we bring this difference of talent to any restoration project. And the third thing that I think this map represents is that we really do try and make sure that as international NGOs where we do have overheads, that by coming together, maybe with a single investment point, we can actually get economies of scale and get more money into the restoration project itself. Next slide, please. But then, there is this thing when you talk about costs, it's about what are we putting costs into if we truly want to embed restoration of forest into the green recovery. And as a partnership, we've kind of come up with these 5 things that I'd like to present for consideration in this panel today, which is the first, that if you're going to do restoration, you need to do it really well and to make sure that your starting sourcing is good. And that means potentially letting natural regeneration happen so that the forest comes back where it was going to anyway. But if you are having to either assist or even just start tree planting, make sure that it's ethically done and practically done so that you've got either a good nursery or ethically sourced seed source, for example. And this is really key to ensuring that you're starting off with good stuff when you begin your restoration. The second principle is, for us, really obvious, but often isn't so obvious when you're looking at where you could do restoration, is to make sure that where you're working actually is the ecosystem, that the likelihood of success is highest. We call this right trees in right places, and we would say that that's why we often work at the forest frontier, because it's so close to what we had before. But we're asking that if you aren't planting there, be really careful about what the ecosystem you're in, so you're not stealing perhaps a peat bog system or a savanna that might be doing just as good work for carbon as restored forest might do. The next one is to make sure that you do, and in fact, I think a couple of the speakers talked about this before, the importance of being able to make sure that you have the resources to grow, to restore, to really make sure that the areas that you're trying to restore are protecting. And so that it's not just restoring the initial bit, but actually making sure you've got the resources for growing and guarding that restoration project. The fourth point is the one that, in my own experience, we see often gets the fastest and the quickest budget cut, which is the monitoring and evaluation piece. And it's not just so that we can write a good report at the end of our project, but truly, truly so that we can monitor the impact that our restoration is trying to assure that we're delivering. And even more important for me, what we used to call adaptive programming in my old world, so that we can improve it as we go, so that any restoration project can adapt and evolve. And the final piece is more of a consideration of how and whom you're speaking to do this restoration work. And it really is that restoration in and of itself, as much as I would love as a conservationist to say that people do it for the trees and the biodiversity, for the trees themselves, it's really for the bigger pieces that the world is investing in. And for me, that's about the rights and opportunity of the communities in and around the forest, whether it's the right to the indigenous people who might be governing the forest, or the livelihood opportunities for the communities in and around the forest. It's the biodiversity that, as conservation organizations, we know that the world cares about. We know that the balance of this planet depends on it, and that a well-restored forest can help drive those biodiversity goals as enshrined in the CBD and the next COP. And then, and only then, do we think that the climate benefits are worth calculating, because we believe if you get the people right, and the nature then follows because the people understand the value of nature and biodiversity, then the climate benefits naturally accrue. So if you think of not just outputs, but outcomes, you can move towards, we think, a more sustainable model for restoration. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. That was a great run through there of some of the top level things we need to take into account. So now finally moving on to Ava Mayhoffer, who's a Principal Advisor and Lead Environment and Biodiversity Specialist from the European Investment Bank, who's going to give us a perspective, for a donor perspective, on some of the finance mechanisms that can support the right sort of restoration. Thank you, Ava.
Thank you, Noelle, and good evening, good afternoon, good morning to all of you. This is going to be a challenge to follow, these excellent speakers, and I think they've illustrated very well what I'm going to come in and speak about. But I'd like to follow on something that John mentioned, and that's also partnerships, and partnerships are critical in terms of financing. So we know that while government must play a leading role, we know that governments alone cannot deliver the financing needs to protect biodiversity and our forests. So the funds from traditional sources such as ODA and philanthropy remain relatively limited, and therefore it is important to catalyze private sector capital, given that it constitutes potentially the largest available source of financing. However, this will only be realized if appropriate policies, regulations, and incentives are in place, and national, subnational, indigenous peoples organizations, companies, and CSOs join forces to implement concrete initiatives. We have long been financing as multilateral development banks forest restoration, and have acknowledged also that forests are crucial to our strategy for conserving global biodiversity and mitigating climate change. But as John so eloquently put it, it's not only about planting trees, and when financing, we have often failed as financiers to address the social implications of forest restoration. In fact, the success of global forest restoration reaching its full potential, as John nicely illustrated, depends on prioritizing local communities and structuring the project and financing in direct partnership with these communities. So public finance, private investment capital, and procurement commitments are all in theory available to be deployed in a protection, production, support to local economic green recovery models, as illustrated by Solomon, where people and nature are center stage. A key focus area for collaboration between the public and private sectors is then how to accelerate the creation of these partnerships, against which international donors, private investors, traders, buyers can pledge funding and procurement commitments. So developing the specific conditions or deal terms is a process that must address multiple challenges simultaneously while putting smallholders and communities at the heart of its agenda. It must be both inclusive in nature and politically, economically, technologically, socially, and ecologically savvy. And it must be fully owned by the relevant national and subnational jurisdictions, building on and supporting country ambitions. Without that, we won't reach the full potential of restoration. So how does a multilateral development bank such as the EIB support restoration? So we can incubate a pipeline of, sorry, next slide, please. So we can incubate a pipeline of projects by partnering with different actors, whether private or public, working on natural capital solutions, and by linking them to larger investment opportunities, so that we can bring these concepts and pilot projects to scale. We can provide blended finance together with other multilateral development banks or institutions like the GEF or the Green Climate Fund, and leverage resources to develop guarantees, loan, equity investments, and technical assistance, which is absolutely critical to remove barriers that prevent private investments in projects. So the slide here in front of you shows you at what stage and what types of instruments can be deployed when you are either in a new concept, incubator, pilot type of project, and when you start taking it up to scale. As a multilateral development bank, we can also mobilize resources for scale using, for example, our network. We can link projects to resources from our own portfolio, incubate projects for other facilities, contributing to forest restoration, nature-based solutions, and natural capital as a whole, while leveraging, as John mentioned, networks of impact investors, such as the partnership that has been developed under Trillion Trees. But governments and the public sector have an important role through these finance facilities and specific efforts to incentivize increased private investments and creating these enabling conditions for such nature positive investments, which of course include addressing the drivers of forest degradation and loss, are critical. The public sector therefore needs to develop and implement new fiscal policies and increase the effectiveness of existing ones that increase domestic spending on forest restoration. And we've seen some very good examples that Solomon, for example, displayed. And one important final message is we need to disincentivize activities that are harmful to biodiversity and forest restoration, meaning that certain subsidies that cancel out the good work that organizations such as Trillion Trees, what Nigeria is putting in place, BirdLife also, don't get cancelled out because you have these harmful subsidies on the side. I'll stop there and hand it over back to Noelle.
Thank you so much, Ava. That was a really great way to round up those interventions there and get us going on a little bit of Q&A now. And I might come back first to you, actually, in terms of that. Can we put everyone's videos back on, including mine, videos back on, and hopefully we can get a panel view for the panel, the question and answer section. For those listening in, please do put any questions you have into the Q&A box for us to address. We have some other questions already that certainly that have come to mind from my side. So hopefully I can't quite see the panel view, but hopefully that's visible to everybody. So coming to you first, Ava, I guess a question on how can we ensure that looking at the many climate-focused finance at the moment and the green recovery side of things, how can we ensure that people and nature are brought into both those financial instruments and the decision-making that's happening right now?
Thank you, Noelle. I think that there are two aspects. One is that at the moment, nature is not properly valued, and it's certainly not properly valued in any of our decision-making processes, including also the socio-economic benefits that nature brings to society at large. So the first thing is in these types of climate financing, we need to include the externalities, the biodiversity ecosystem externalities, and understand what those socioeconomic benefits are, and understand therefore the trade-offs of doing such a project, a climate project that may be beneficial to climate, but may have severe repercussions on nature. And the second is, I think what the EU taxonomy is trying to do is to make sure that in those climate positive types of economic activities, that they do no significant harm to biodiversity and ecosystem objectives, but also that you have minimum what they call minimum social safeguards, basically making sure that the rights of local communities and people are taken into consideration and that they are not infringed upon.
Great, and I would, from our perspective as well, looking at the bigger picture as well, the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, which is starting to embed a lot of those elements too, would be another way to kind of get that global framework for those enabling conditions that we need in place to support these initiatives. And yes, indeed, if the likes of the EU can start to push that and show leadership, that's very helpful. There's been a question in the chat in terms a specific one, and I think if I come to maybe Andres or working on the ground, a question about how to ensure that we are really reforesting, not afforesting, but we're restoring nature, restoring forests with the right sort of species. Maybe if you want to address that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think in this question it's summarized part of the doubts or the thoughts that more of us told during the presentations. And of course, we use native species. There's no discussion in relation to this in our country. And some of them are fruit ones. And I have, of course, the names in Spanish that perhaps most of the people don't know. The Eugenia is one of the scientific genus. The other is Tabebuia, that is quite common, Peltophorum or Cordia. And one of the things that Sean says in relation to nursery trees, of course, it's not easy. You have to have the land and you have to get the nursery trees, and no And there is a tradition in my country that most of the nurseries don't have native plants, because we have a very high, very acute European immigration in Argentina, and a lot of people brought plants from Europe. So there is a tradition to use European plants. So luckily, there are a lot of there is a net of nursery trees specialized on native plants. And we got one in Misiones province, and fortunately, we bought land to have our own reserve, and we have our own nursery tree right now. And of course, during the process, as John and Poshendra said too, we have to take care the guarding of the work that we are doing, because we have losses during the process. So we have to replace the trees that we plant and unfortunately fail. So native plants, of course, it's not easy, but we found a place that the native ones were in a nursery tree, and then we have our own that it's a solution.
Thank you. That's good to know, and exactly right. We definitely need to be restoring for nature, and that actually takes work and an understanding of what nature actually is, what's supposed to be there, what natural ecosystem restoration is. A question in the chat, and it relates to a sort of another area I wanted to sort of discuss, and maybe coming to those of you on the ground, and maybe starting with Poshendra, in terms of balancing the need to engage non-state actors in designing forest restoration approaches alongside implementing national and global frameworks. So how do you engage national stakeholders, local stakeholders in this process to ensure that we are achieving these wider objectives? Maybe to start with you, Poshendra, in terms of how to get those stakeholders engaged.
Yeah, thank you, Noel. So in terms of the stakeholder engagement, obviously on a global scale, global restaurant movements consist of different varieties of stakeholders, from the global to regional to national to local level. So in terms of the engagement of the particularly the non-state actors of different kinds in the national planning, restoration planning, implementation and monitoring, we have to have a proper engagement with these varieties of stakeholders, starting with the stakeholder mapping in terms of who is going to be affected, like in the local level and also at the national level as well. So they should have a right in terms of they should have a voice, as well as they should have participation in terms of the decision-making processes. So particularly at the local level, we need to ensure that when we implement restoration project, we start this public consultation participation right from the beginning of the planning process. So in order to ensure more meaningful and full participation of particularly indigenous people and local communities. Also, one of the aspects we need to consider is local communities are not similar. So, there is dynamics of social differences such as class, ethnicity, culture, gender, age, spatiality, and those kinds. That also impact both the processes and outcomes of restoration. So we need to consider these elements as well. So particularly, I think for more engagement of non-state actors of different kinds, in terms of ensuring full and effective participation, we need to ask who participates among these varieties of non-state actors. When they participate, ensuring that they are participating right from the beginning of restoration planning, and that participation continues throughout the restoration implementation and monitoring as well. That's also very important. And also then we need to question about how they participate. What is the quality of participation? It's not about just getting the number right in terms of the balance of these non-state actors, but ensuring that this participation is empowering experience and these stakeholders are genuinely able to influence the decision-making processes as well. So I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thanks, Pushendra. Some more questions coming through in the chat. Maybe I'll turn to both of actually Solomon and John for perspectives on this challenge, actually, in terms of linked to the question about getting the right species, having that understanding, that scientific underpinning, but making sure that we've got this is sustainable and we're using the learning. So I think that speaks to kind of the right sorts of partnerships and the right sorts of learning and this need to ensure sustainability and learning from our experiences on the ground. Maybe John, to come to you first about some of those aspects, because yeah, it's critical we get this right, but it's not always easy. So how do partnerships help in that and delivering on the ground?
I'll maybe just give a brief overview, because I think I'd love to hear Solomon's perspective from a national thing as well. But truly, this is part of one of the things, and it's why it's so nice to have Eva on here and to bring her perspective as well. Because I think when we were preparing on this, we talked about the costs of things and how you compare them to the actual long-term either savings or cost efficiency. And I think if you begin to think about building partnerships that try and get their heads around this idea that to put the right things, as Andre said, the native species back, which is going to lead to the best biodiversity, to then realize that maybe some of those communities have already lost some of their idea of why those native species were initially valued. It's very complex, but it means a higher investment at the front end of a restoration project, so that you're getting the right seeds in the right way in the right places. You've spent the time to get the communities involved, and then you then have to do all the stuff that we talked about in my slides of having the 5 principles of making sure you've got somewhere to guard it, to monitor it, and to be able to report back, so that if we do convince someone like the European Investment Bank to invest, that we can show that actually that upfront investment long-term saved money. So I guess the thing is, and that is where partnerships can help, because I know that I happen to lead this partnership, but I know that I need someone who understands biodiversity and carbon and community mobilization in a way that I couldn't do on my own. So at least from our perspective, that's how we build the partnership, is trying to be really clear who brings what to that. And as I said, it'd be interesting to see how that works when you've got 17 states and delivering as Solomon is in Nigeria.
Yeah, exactly. And so, yeah, Solomon, maybe just a few quick perspectives from your side and how you're then trying to take that learning and through to policy level to make sure that is recognised, a complicated but necessary understanding on the ground is fed up to national policy level. Maybe if you can touch on that.
Thank you very much. NCF is a national organization, and our scope is so national. And in trying to achieve the green recovery in Nigeria, the first thing we did is the restoration blueprint, which consists of the 5 R's that I mentioned earlier. The right people we are going to be working with, which has to do with it involves a multi-stakeholder engagement, the communities, the subnational, the people that are going to be involved in the labor, the people that are going to be developing the seedling at community level, and all of that. So we try to map all of these things across the 6 geopolitical zones of Nigeria. And this, to me, it's a really big, hard work to do, but if you are able to achieve it, your restoration target is going to be achieved. That's just the 50% assurance that you are going to be able to achieve your restoration target if you are able to deliver on this blueprint. So the second thing is the right site. Which sites are needed for restoration? We combine science, we combine tools like GIS to be able to understand these sites that are satellite imageries, looking at sites that have been degraded, what are the threat level, and how what are the restoration effort that is needed to be achieved in those sites. So we map out those sites first. And the other one is the right timing. Planting Nigeria has 8 ecological zones, and these have different climates and environment. And so you have to understand the right time to plant, if it is the raining season that works for a temperate region, or if it is raining, or if it is the dry season that works for, you know, a mountainous region. So all of these things were put into perspective, and these also helps us in designing who does what and who we work with, and also the quantity, the number that is needed to restore each of those sites that have been identified. So all of these right things really flows into each other to be able to, in terms of quantitatively, to be able to know, okay, this is, it's about counting the cost before you go into it. So, and the right species also really matter. These are knowledge that we get from local indigenous people and what really they need. Some are really interested in fruit trees, while some areas are also interested in native trees. We don't even plant exotic species at all because NCF is not known for that. So all of these help us to know where are we going to source these seedlings from, who are going to be developing these, and that help us to be able to have a strong blueprint for restoration plan. And that was how we were able to achieve the 17 states. And we're still going more than 17. We're still looking at the entire 36 states of the Federation. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. So just to squeeze in before we wrap up, a quick question for Jose Luis. Similar to that, actually, have you got any additional insights into how you get restoration to work on the ground after your long-term, the kind of long-term work you've been doing in your area as well?
Thank you, Noel. From our point of view, we, the human being, are very, very pretending people, no? And our experience have demonstrated that the plot that we have put more pressure is the plot that cannot recover up to today. So we need to give the necessary space to nature to be that the nature will recover itself. This is the main issue. And the second issue is the socio-economic issue, because the social problems are very, very important, very, very, I don't know, generated a lot of pressure, a lot of high pressure in our reserve. So we need, in one or another hand, we need to offer some other alternative than the illegal issues, because illegal issues is pressing us here. But I don't know how to explain. It's very complicated because the illegal issues has deep roots.
Yeah.
Up to the politicians and the national structure. So it's very complicated to cope with it.
Yeah.
With
this.
No,
exactly. I think that we've got to be realistic. Sometimes these areas are very challenging, and there's a wider enabling conditions that also need to sometimes be addressed. Thank you. Yeah, and I think being honest as well about the challenges ahead is very important. So thanks everybody. We loads. I wish we had longer to discuss this. There's so many more questions that I have, and many more areas we could dig down into. But I'm going to wrap us up a bit. Just a few sort of thoughts that come from everything everyone has said from my side. I think that was really illuminating, fascinating race through the issues from principles to on ground to policy and finance. So thank you all for sharing your perspectives. For me, I think some of the lessons learned are that restoration is by its very nature not a fast process, and doing it right, which for us in the context we've been talking about means delivering on multiple goals and ensuring the long-term sustainability, takes much more planning, stakeholder engagement and tracking of outcomes than has often been done to date. So that really has to be recognised, that sort of investment that we need and the different elements we need in place to make sure it's going to work. So the way forward is to do this right, is to be clear about the outcomes we want to achieve. And for us, they're multiple. So by integrating nature and people, even traditionally straight climate outcomes are therefore more sustainable and resilient. So while trying to bundle these multiple outcomes together may seem more complicated and costly and time consuming, ultimately that's more cost efficient and it will get more buy-in and then support its sustainability. So it is worth doing it right and thinking about these synergies from the outset and working to support them. And this is where the partnerships also come in. So everybody bringing different skills and expertise, but also at different scales. So that helps us to share lessons, ensure quality and oversight, and then scale up and bringing these economies of scale that we mentioned. And so it's critically important, though, that we have the policies and the finance in place that recognise and embed these principles, which including engaging all stakeholders as partners to ensure its success, and ensuring that governments create the enabling conditions to support this. And so we talked about a number of different policy processes. And of course, we shouldn't forget we're in the UN decade of ecosystem restoration. We've got important climate discussions happening and the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. So a whole range of different global frameworks that we need to then have translated and furthered through initiatives such as EU level, the EU taxonomy, for example, but through those sorts of policy frameworks. And we also need to address the other side.
Have we lost Noelle?
You are in charge.
Hi, yeah, so we've just unfortunately lost Noelle, so I will come in and pick up thanking everyone. And conveniently we've come to the end of our time today anyway. But as we said, it was great presentations from all the speakers. And if you are interested in some other talks we've got coming on this issue, we have the Forest Governance Forum, and I think we're going to have some links posted in the chat, and also another seminar as part of New York Climate Week on renewable energy, doing that in a nature sensitive manner. So please join us for that one if you haven't already, and thank you so much for all of your engaging questions in the chat and the presentations from everyone. It's really great discussion. The recording will be available up on our BirdLife Trillion Trees website and on socials, and hopefully we will see you all again soon. And we just got some more promotion happening in the chat from some attendees of the event and the Asia Pacific Forest Governance Forum. And hopefully we will see you all again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you from me. Apologies, I just dropped out. So that was very well rescued there. Thank you, Rhiannon. Internet failure at a critical moment. So yeah, thanks from me too, and thanks to everyone for listening.
Yeah, Oli, I would like to add something, Rhiannon. Yeah, it's possible.
Go for it. Yeah.
Once, 5 years ago, I was in Costa Rica with Daniel Jansen. Perhaps you know Daniel Jansen. It's a senior ecologist that is working in the West, in the dry forest of Guanacaste. And he was working in restoration since 30 years, 3-0. And when we arrived to the forest, I said to him, oh, we were talking in Spanish, in American Spanish. So he said, I said to him, oh, it's incredible how well restored is this place. And he corrected me and said, no, Andres, it's not restored, it's restoring. So after 30 years, so we have to trust that it's a process, it's a long process, but we have to start, and this decade is key for us. So do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, exactly. It's not a short process, but we will get there, and we need to get there. So I think that's a good note to end on. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your days and your evenings.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.